I spent my entire life taking care of my family. I washed clothes, cooked meals, told bedtime stories, offered hugs when no one else would listen, and silenced my own pain to comfort theirs. I was a mother, a grandmother, a counselor, a nurse, a babysitter, a housekeeper, and above all, I was always there, always. But the moment I pretended to be sick, everything changed. That was all it took for me to see how little they truly cared. That was all it took for their masks to fall. Harsh words were spoken, cold silence took over. Only one person truly saw my pain, and it was because of them that I changed everything. That morning, the sun poured through the living room window, just as it always did, warming the wooden floors and lighting up the houseplants. I faithfully watered every day. I sat in my usual armchair by the window, a shawl draped over my shoulders, the same teacup between my hands, the same emptiness weighing on my chest. From the kitchen, I could hear laughter, my son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandchildren chatting away. They were talking about their weekend plans, restaurants, vacations, everything except the old woman sitting less than 30 feet away from them. I let out a soft cough, quiet, almost a plea for attention. No one noticed. I tried again, a little louder. Still nothing. I might as well have been part of the furniture. I set the cup down gently on the side table. The porcelain made a sharp clink. No reaction. I slowly stood up, faking the effort, though it wasn't far from my real struggle, and walked a few steps to the living room doorway. Their conversation paused for a second. My son glanced at me, then turned away. They kept laughing. There, at the edge of the room, I let my body sag. I allowed myself to slump against the wall, lowering myself to the floor, breathing unevenly, pretending to lose strength. No one came. Minutes passed. Long minutes. Finally, I heard my daughter-in-law's voice. "She's faking again. Just ignore her." My teenage grandson chuckled under his breath. My son said nothing, and somehow, that silence hurt more than any insult. A single tear rolled down my cheek. Not for the performance, but because, in that moment, I realized how deeply invisible I had become. Maybe all I was to them now was a burden, a nuisance, a ghost in a house that used to be mine. And even though all of this was part of a plan, part of an act, the pain was real. The loneliness was real. The fear that my value had expired, it felt like the cruelest truth. I returned to my armchair. I waited for the day to pass. And when night fell, I began writing this story. Not just to vent, but to warn. To reach others like me who gave their entire lives to their families, only to be cast aside in the end. What would you do if you discovered that your presence was tolerated more than it was loved? If this story has touched your heart in any way, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps spread these stories to others who also need to be heard. And now tell me in the comments, have you ever had to pretend to be weak just to find out who really cared? Your story might change someone's life who's going through the exact same thing right now. My name is Margaret. I'm 78 years old. I live with my son, his wife, and my 2 grandchildren. Or rather, I used to. For years, I was the backbone of this family. The silent pillar that kept everything standing while everyone else grew up, made mistakes, fell apart, and ran back into my arms for comfort, advice, or forgiveness. I was always there. I never failed them. I never asked for anything, never demanded recognition. It was as if my love came with no conditions, as if my only purpose was to give. And the saddest part is, I accepted that role with pride. I felt useful. I felt irreplaceable. Until time, that quiet and ruthless thief, slowly pushed me off the main stage of my own life and into the background. In my younger years, no one ignored me. People called me Mrs. Margaret with respect. The neighbors sought my advice. Children from the neighborhood spoke kindly to me. And in my home, the word mom carried weight. I made everyone's favorite meals from scratch. I remembered every important date. I followed my grandchildren's school progress, planned their birthdays with joy, with homemade cakes, balloons, and love. When my husband passed, the world lost one of its pillars, but I stayed strong. My son, teary-eyed, told me I'd never be alone. He said his home was mine too. He hugged me and whispered, "Mom, you'll always have a place here." I truly believed that. I believed I'd continue being important, present, alive in their world. But gradually, I became part of the scenery, like an old armchair no one wants to throw out but no one really uses anymore. At first, it was subtle. Someone forgot to invite me to dinner, and later said they thought I had already eaten. Someone would lower their voice and stop talking. When I entered the room, my questions started getting answered with a, "We'll talk later, Grandma." Even my voice stopped being acknowledged. I could be speaking to a wall, and it would make no difference. That realization crept in slowly, day by day, stealing little pieces of me. One evening, I made a special dinner. I baked lasagna, my youngest grandson's favorite. I set the table with flowers from the garden, folded the napkins, lit candles. I waited with a smile. They came in, glanced at everything, said, "Looks nice," and within minutes, they were in the living room, each on their phone, ordering pizza. No one sat down. No one said thank you. I ate alone, swallowing more than just food. I swallowed my disappointment, my invisibility, the terrifying feeling that maybe my time had expired and no one had the courage to tell me. Another day, I asked my son if he wanted me to wash his shirts, like I always did. He replied with a quick "No need, Mom," but his tone felt more like, "Don't interfere." When I tried to joke with my granddaughter, someone said I was too old to understand anything, that my stories were too long, that I talked too slowly. I smiled politely, but inside, that smile was a scream held back by pride. My presence became inconvenient, so I started walking through my own house like someone asking for permission to exist. I was the one who used to wake up early and make breakfast for everyone. Then, one day, I found the kitchen door locked. I used to say, "Good night," and get nothing but muffled door clicks in return. I became the one who heard laughter from upstairs and assumed they were laughing about me. The one who sat alone on the porch, hoping someone would remember I was there. But no one remembered. Not even when I stayed in my room all day. They thought I liked being alone. They thought it was just my way. But it was the only way I found to avoid being in the way, to not disturb, to keep my sadness hidden behind fake peace. Still, I kept trying. I kept serving. I folded laundry no one asked me to, cleaned bathrooms already clean, baked cakes that sat untouched. One day, I grabbed a book and started reading aloud, pretending I was practicing my voice. I hoped someone would say, "That's beautiful, Grandma." No one said a word. My granddaughter walked by and chuckled, saying it sounded like something a crazy person would do. Her laugh hurt more than any illness, more than any aching joint. And the worst part is, inside, I still felt alive. I still wanted to laugh. I wanted to talk. I wanted to tell my memories about the days when life felt different. But when you're old, it's as if you lose the right to dream. It's as if all you're good for is telling stories no one wants to hear. The world around you speeds up, and you become the obstacle. They assume the love you gave is endless and unconditional. They think you'll always be there, no matter how much they ignore you. But even those who love deeply need to be loved in return. Even those who care need someone to care back. And even the quietest people are screaming inside. What hurts the most is realizing that what used to be kindness now feels like charity. When one of my grandkids holds the door for me, I almost cry with gratitude. Then I remember, it should be normal. When my son asks how my day was, my heart races like a child getting a gift. But it shouldn't be rare. It should be part of everyday life. Abandonment doesn't always come with yelling or slamming doors. It starts with absence, with silence, with the glance that never meets your eyes, with the answer that never comes. And when you finally notice, you're sitting in the same house, listening to voices from a family that doesn't include you anymore, even though you live right there. If you've read this far, I want you to share something in the comments. When was the moment you felt the world stopped listening to you? Because maybe, just maybe, it's time to remember that your voice still matters. And sometimes, it's in the silence that we begin to truly hear ourselves. That's when I decided to pretend. Not out of revenge, not out of cruelty, but out of despair. I wanted to know who still truly loved me. Because the doubt had been eating away at me like a silent disease. Each day, I felt less human. It was as if they had stripped me of the right to exist with dignity. It wasn't about living anymore, it was about surviving the feeling of being out of place all the time. And when you reach that point, any gesture becomes a cry for help. That's how my plan was born. A simple but sharp plan. Pretend to be sick. That was it. A quiet, calculated performance, but also a desperate plea for love. I started with mild symptoms, nothing alarming. Back pain, occasional dizziness, weakness in my legs. Sometimes I'd hold the wall for support, pretending to be off balance. Other times, I'd place a hand on my chest and say, my heart felt strange. Within a few days, I planted small signs around the house. I left medicine bottles on the table, pretended to forget where I put things, deliberately mixed up names in simple conversations. I wanted to see who would notice, who would care, and, as expected, no one said anything. No one asked. At most, they exchanged glances like, it's starting. By the second week, I escalated it. I said I had a doctor's appointment to run some tests. I faked phone calls on speaker so they'd hear. I spoke loudly on purpose. I made sure they heard, the doctor suggesting that it could be something serious. I printed out fake medical papers with confusing technical terms, left them on the living room table. I sat there with a pale expression, waiting for a reaction. My son walked by, glanced at the envelope, and said nothing. My daughter-in-law, more curious, quietly opened it, thinking I wasn't looking. She read it, widened her eyes, closed it, and laughed to herself as she walked away. That laugh still echoes in my mind. That night, no one mentioned the papers. No one asked how the exam went. No one asked if I was okay. Instead, they ordered takeout, laughed loudly, made plans for the weekend. I stayed in the same chair, with the same envelope on my lap, pretending to read, but watching, observing, every gesture, every absence. It felt like watching a play where I was supposed to be the lead, but nobody had given me a script. I was a piece of furniture, a faded curtain in the background. In the days that followed, I intensified the act, left meals half-eaten, sat with a pained expression, took longer in the bathroom, napped during the day, complained of chills even in warm weather. Still, the most I got was a sideways glance or a sarcastic comment. I heard my granddaughter saying on the phone, the old lady's losing it. I heard my son say, it might be time to start preparing for the worst. I heard my daughter-in-law suggest that if I were hospitalized, they could finally turn my room into a home office. Each phrase felt like a stab. Each silence was abandonment. There was no concern in the annoyance, no love in the calculation. I was becoming a burden, and even though it was all part of my plan, it hurt as if it were real, because deep down, it was. The plan only exposed what was already there. I didn't create anything. I just held up a mirror, forced each of them to see themselves without filters. What I saw was a parade of indifference, coldness, and eagerness to be free of me. One afternoon, as I carefully came down the stairs, I heard my daughter-in-law say that if I got worse, they might find a spot for me in a public facility. My son didn't respond, just sighed. My granddaughter added, at least the Wi-Fi would be better without her around. I laughed inside, a bitter, broken laugh, the kind only someone discarded can understand. That moment sealed it for me. They didn't love me, they tolerated me, and only as long as I was useful, as long as I didn't take up too much space, too much time, or too much money. It wasn't long before the jokes started. Comments like, Grandma's forgetting everything, or she end up like Aunt Marlene in a home, all said with a chuckle, but with poison enough to rot my soul. No one takes care of someone they see as a nuisance, and no one asks if you need help when they've already decided you are the problem. I was the problem. To them, to their comfort, to the peace of their perfect house. And still, I kept performing. I stayed strong, because deep down, I still wanted to see if just someone might surprise me. I faked a minor episode, dropped a spoon, and stared at it on the floor, pretending I couldn't bend to pick it up. They watched from the kitchen, laughed, ignored me. When I finally stood and went to my room, I heard my granddaughter whisper, she's being dramatic again. I cried silently, for the act, for the truth beneath it, for the cruel realization that, to them, I was just a delayed goodbye, an uncomfortable presence they tolerated out of guilt. But it was during the darkest part of this performance that something different happened. A detail, a small crack in their cold facade, and that's when everything started to shift. But before I tell you what changed, I want to ask you something in the comments. Have you ever pretended to be weak just to find out who would show up for you? Sometimes, the only way to tear off someone's mask is to wear one yourself. That's when I heard my daughter-in-law say it, casually, like she was talking about the weather. With some luck, she'll be gone soon, and the house will be ours. No hesitation, no shame, just a flat, icy statement. It was evening. I was coming down the stairs slowly, holding the railing. When her voice floated up and sliced through the silence like a knife, there was no sarcasm in her tone, no nervous laugh to soften the blow, just raw truth. And in that exact second, everything inside me shattered. Up until then, even though my little act was meant to expose the truth, part of me still wanted to believe there was love left. But that sentence, that one heartless line, made it clear that my family had already buried me in silence long ago. What followed was a string of small realizations, like jagged pieces of a puzzle snapping into place, revealing a picture I had been too blind or too hopeful to see. Flashbacks of past moments I'd dismissed as coincidence now returned with painful clarity. I remembered every time my son avoided taking me to the doctor, even when I said I was in serious pain. Chest tightness. It's probably just anxiety, Mom. Dizziness. It's your age. When I asked if he could come with me for a test, he muttered, "I can't today," without even looking up from his phone. Then he suggested I call the neighbor instead. That should have been a red flag. But a mother's heart is foolish. It always wants to believe. It always hopes for one more chance. I remembered when I first began pretending to forget things. My daughter-in-law started hiding my medication. She found it amusing to watch me search for things she had deliberately moved. Once, she caught me opening the wrong drawer and said with a smirk, "See? She doesn't even know where she puts things anymore." That was part of the act, but her joy in my confusion was very real. She liked seeing me helpless, weak, slipping. It meant she was getting closer to taking full control of the house. And control was all she ever wanted. What I didn't expect was my granddaughter asking for my room. Yes, those exact words, "Grandma, when you go to the hospital, can I have your room?" Not a hesitant question, not said with care, just blunt, practical, as if I were already gone. I looked at her and asked, "Do you really think I'm going to the hospital?" She shrugged. "I think so. Mom said it'd be better for everyone." Better for who? Why? I wanted to scream, but the scream died dry in my throat. Because I realized right then my departure was already part of their plan. And my room, once my refuge, was now just real estate. Everything began to make a different kind of sense. The laughter that stopped when I walked in, the doors that closed too quickly, the glances exchanged behind my back, the hushed texts and awkward pauses. This wasn't in my head. It was calculated, cold, deliberate. While I pretended to be sick, they pretended to care. But there was no care, only strategy. They were waiting for me to fall, quietly rooting for it. Not out loud, but deep down, they hoped I'd disappear. I started noticing how my meals were served last. My soup was always cold. My blanket had been given to the dog. My slippers left outside in the rain. No one invited me to watch movies anymore. The TV was turned off the moment I walked in. My houseplants were dying because I wasn't allowed to water them. "Just sit down, Grandma. You get tired easily." It wasn't protection, it was exclusion. Isolation dressed up as concern. One night, I went downstairs to get a glass of water and overheard my son say, "We really need to figure this out soon, before things get worse." My daughter-in-law replied, "If we wait too long, the house might go to the state." I went back upstairs with an empty bottle, my throat dry, my heart even drier. I locked myself in my room, sat on the edge of the bed, looked into the mirror. And there she was, a woman who still had thoughts, memories, love. But in this house, she was already dead to them. Just a ghost, an obstacle, a statistic on a waiting list for a nursing home. The tears came without a sound. I didn't cry like a child. I cried like someone who finally understands she's lost. Like someone who sees that she no longer belongs. Like someone who finally accepts that love, if it ever existed here, is long gone. My pillow got wet, but I didn't move. The plan had worked. They'd shown me their truth, but I wasn't ready for it. No human being is ever truly ready to see themselves as disposable. I barely slept, woke up to the sound of the house already alive. The smell of coffee, once a comfort, was now just a reminder that life continued without me. No one knocked on my door. No one asked if I had slept well. If I needed anything, their world spun, and I sat still, trying to remember when exactly I stopped being the mother who helped, the mother-in-law who supported, the grandmother who inspired. When did I become furniture, a silent burden? And the most twisted part of it all, I couldn't bring myself to hate them. A mother's love survives betrayal, but what dies and dies for good is trust. Disappointment tastes like metal in the mouth. it weighs on the chest, it numbs the shoulders, it silences the soul. And right there, in that quiet room filled with memories of who I used to be, I realized I was completely alone. Alone, despite being surrounded. Alone, even with voices echoing through the walls. Alone, even while breathing the same air. And it's in that kind of silence that you finally learn who you are. Now, I want to hear from you in the comments. What's the one sentence you heard in your life that never left your mind? Because sometimes, all it takes is one sentence to show you exactly who's really on your side, and who's just waiting for you to vanish. But there was someone who, even in the middle of the coldness, the distance, and the carefully disguised abandonment, still looked me in the eyes. Someone who didn't need to speak much to make me feel human again, seen, present, not as a burden, not as a leftover, but as a person who still mattered. It was the youngest in the house, my grandson, the quiet one, the one most adults overlooked, maybe because he still carried inside him something everyone else seemed to have lost: sensitivity. He observed everything, always had. He was never loud, but his eyes said what no one else dared to say. And it was through those eyes that I began to feel like I still had a place in this world. It started, subtly, small gestures that most people wouldn't have even noticed. A slice of cake left on my table, still warm, before breakfast was served. A glass of water with a slice of lemon, just how I liked it, left beside my chair on the porch. A blanket gently folded across my legs while I napped on the couch. Tiny things, but those tiny things lit a fire in me that I thought had long burned out the feeling of being truly loved. One evening, while I was secretly washing a cup in the kitchen, yes, secretly, because they'd asked me not to touch anything, he walked up beside me and stood in silence. Then he picked up a towel and started drying the dishes with me. It was so simple, but so powerful. No one else did that. No one even acknowledged me in that space. And there we were, side by side, not saying a word, sharing a chore that no one had asked for, but one that made me feel more connected than any conversation ever had. After that, he started coming to my room more often. He'd knock, gently. Sometimes he wouldn't say anything. He'd just sit on the floor with his phone and stay with me. Other times, he'd pull up a chair and say he wanted to hear one of my stories. But one no one else knows, Grandma. So I'd tell him, and he'd listen. Really listen. Eyes on mine. No rush, no judgment, no pretending. For the first time in so long, I felt like my voice actually reached someone, like it didn't just bounce off walls and disappear. He was the one who noticed my medication had been hidden. He saw me searching drawers, clearly confused, and began to pay attention. One day, he handed me 2 pills wrapped in a napkin and said, "I found these in the back of the pantry. You shouldn't be without them, Grandma." I didn't cry at the time, but inside, everything collapsed. He was just a boy, but he had more empathy in his little heart than all the adults in that house combined. Soon, I realized he was sneaking off and returning with little surprises. A piece of candy, a scarf, a bookmark. When I asked how he knew I needed those things, he replied, "I notice," and how rare it was for someone to notice me anymore. Most people only saw what bothered them, if I was in the way, if I took up too much space, if my presence still served any purpose. But not him. He saw between the lines. The quiet aches, the words I didn't say, the silence that screamed. The day everything truly shifted was when I overheard a conversation from the living room, voices low, sarcastic tones, my son, daughter, in-law, and even my granddaughter talking about how I was getting more confused every day. They laughed, joked about how something had to be done soon, and then I heard his voice, firm, shaken, furious. "Aren't you ashamed?" Silence. "She's my grandmother. She's done more for this family than any of you. And if you keep treating her like this, I'll tell everyone what's really going on here." No one replied. He stormed up the stairs. That same day, he came to my room, hugged me, tight, without saying a word, and then whispered, his voice breaking, "Grandma, I love you. Even if you get sick, I'll take care of you." That sentence struck me like lightning, because it wasn't coated in guilt or sugar. It didn't come with conditions. It came from the purest part of him. He didn't see me as property. He didn't care about inheritance. He wasn't thinking about rooms or rights. He saw me as a person, as a woman, as someone worth loving. And for the first time in years, I trusted someone completely. Maybe there was still something in me worth protecting. That night, I slept differently, not in fear, but with a peace I hadn't felt in years. Because even in the middle of so much coldness, there was still a light burning, a spark of true love, a clean heart, a boy who still knew the difference between duty and affection, between obligation and care. He didn't do it out of pity, he did it out of love, out of memory, out of character. And maybe that's what every person truly wants, after a lifetime of giving, just to know someone still cares, to know that among all the eyes that pass right through us, one pair still sees us, still recognizes us, sees beyond the wrinkles, beyond the age, beyond the fragility, sees us. That kind of recognition is worth more than any material thing, more than a house, more than a will. It's what gives life meaning when everything else has faded. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone who truly saw you, even when everyone else ignored you? Because sometimes, just one person who sees you for who you are is enough to remind you that you still matter. The next morning, I walked into the notary's office with my spine straight and my voice steady. I wasn't the trembling old woman they all assumed I had become. I wasn't the fragile, confused shadow they whispered about when they thought I couldn't hear. I was Margaret, the woman who had raised a family, built a home from nothing, and poured love into every corner of a house that now felt like a stranger to her. And I had one thing left, one final act of clarity and strength. I was there to rewrite my will. The lawyer looked at me with a mixture of respect and surprise. We had met years before, when my husband was still alive and the world still seemed kind. Back then, our visits had been routine contracts, land deeds, papers that didn't seem urgent. But now, the tone was different. I sat down, took a deep breath, and told him everything. I told him about the manipulation, the laughter behind closed doors, the meals ignored, the medicine hidden, the room requested before I had even left it. I told him how I had faked weakness to uncover the real disease, the absence of love. I gave him names, dates, places. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't soften anything. I wanted the truth to stand on its own. And then I recorded a video. Just me, a plain background, and my voice. My words weren't bitter. They were clear. I looked into the lens like I was looking into someone's soul. I spoke to them, the ones who had betrayed me, but also to the one who had saved me. I said what they refused to hear face to face. I said I knew what they thought of me, that I had heard every joke, every plan, every wish for my absence. I said I forgave them, not because they deserved it, but because I refused to carry them any longer inside me. I ended the video with a name, one name, the only one that mattered. Everything I had was going to my grandson, the house, the savings, the jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother, the photographs, the letters, the things I had protected for decades. All of it would belong to the only person in that house who still saw me as a person. He never asked for anything. He never demanded. He simply loved. And sometimes, love in silence speaks louder than all the noise in the world. The plan was simple. I would leave, quietly, without drama. I had already packed a suitcase with the essentials. I had arranged a place to stay with an old friend from church. Someone who remembered the real me. Someone who hadn't forgotten the sound of my voice. I didn't want confrontation. I didn't want apologies soaked in guilt. I wanted dignity. Just that. To leave before they noticed what they had lost. To disappear before they could rewrite the story in their favor. Before sunrise, I placed the letter on my grandson's desk. A sealed envelope. Handwritten, with only his name on it. Inside, I told him everything. I told him about the will, about the recordings, about the lawyer. I told him he was the reason I still believed in family. I told him I saw in his eyes the same kindness I had once seen in his grandfather. And I told him that one day, when he grew older, he'd understand why I had to leave the way I did. I stood by his door for a moment, listening to his breathing. The kind of peace only a clean heart can produce. I wanted to hug him one last time, but I didn't. Because that moment wasn't mine to take, it was his. His story was only beginning. Mine was finding a new chapter, one without walls that echoed with betrayal. As I stepped outside and the cold air touched my skin, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel broken. I felt free. Because freedom doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes, it comes in silence. In the act of walking away before the world realizes it pushed you too far. And as I watched the sun rise over the neighborhood, I knew that everything I had done, every word, Every decision was not about revenge, it was about truth. And truth, even when ignored, has a way of surviving. Now, let me ask you something in the comments. Have you ever reached a point where you chose dignity over explanation? Because sometimes, the loudest act of love you can give yourself is to leave without looking back. If you really want to know who cares about you, pretend to be weak. Pretend you have nothing left to offer. Nothing to give. Nothing to protect. Then watch. Watch the eyes that avoid yours. Watch the hands that stop reaching. Watch the doors that close softly but permanently. Because when you remove the version of yourself that serves others, entertains others, helps others, what remains is the version they never bothered to love. And that version, that raw, quiet, unfiltered self, is the one who deserves to be seen. Not everyone will see you, but the ones who do, their tears are the only ones that deserve yours. Now, I live in a small cottage, far from that house that used to be mine, but never felt like it. I share it with a friend from long ago. We were young together once, lost touch, then found each other again in the most unexpected moment. She welcomed me not as someone broken, not as someone who needed help, but simply as someone who had value. Still, we spend our mornings walking slowly through the garden. We drink tea on the porch, talk about books, tell stories no one else remembers, because only we were there when they happened. There is no judgment in her presence, no pity, only peace. And for the first time in years, I'm not pretending, I'm not performing, I'm not surviving, I'm simply living. My son, of course, tried to fight the will. He stormed into the lawyer's office, demanded to see paperwork, accused everyone of manipulation. But the truth had already been documented. The lawyer had my voice, my face, my signature. The truth, once spoken with clarity, becomes immovable. He stood there, angry and exposed, not because he had lost money, but because he had lost the version of me that never said no, the version that fed him, cleaned after him, protected him from the world. He didn't cry for me. He cried for the part of himself that would never again be served by my silence. He walked away, and I didn't follow. Because love that needs to be chased isn't love, it's dependence, it's habit, it's the comfort of never being challenged. I loved my son. I always will. But there comes a point in a woman's life when she stops begging for attention and starts choosing her own peace. That point doesn't come with a dramatic scene. It comes quietly, like closing a door you no longer need to keep open. As for my grandson, he visits every week, rain or shine. No one reminds him. No one forces him. He brings fresh flowers from the local market and books he thinks I'll like. He sits on the floor like he used to. Sometimes we don't even talk. We just exist in the same space, comfortably. That, to me, is the purest kind of love. No performance, no expectations, just presence. One afternoon, I was watering the garden when I looked up and saw him through the window, sitting in the kitchen, reading out loud. I didn't ask him to. I didn't even know he was there yet. But he was reading my favorite book, his voice echoing gently through the house. I stood still for a moment and felt something rise in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Safety, not because I was protected, but because I was finally seen, fully, and what he saw, he cherished. There's a picture of us in the living room. He's smiling like someone who still believes in the good in people. I'm smiling like someone who knows that sometimes the good in people is real. Beneath the photo, there's a frame with a phrase that I chose myself. True love doesn't need to be taught, it simply appears. And when people come to visit, they always stop to look at it. Some smile, some tear up, and some, you can tell, see themselves in those words. You see, the world is full of people who will stand beside you when you're strong, when you're useful, when your name still opens doors. But take away the roles, strip the titles, let your hair gray, your hands shake, your voice soften. Let your usefulness fade. That's when you'll see. That's when you'll understand. The people who cry when you're weak, those are the only ones who truly loved you when you were strong. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to prove that you were never invisible, that you were never too much or too little, that you didn't have to change to be loved. You just had to stop trying to be lovable for the wrong people. Now I want to ask you something in the comments. Who was the one person who saw you when you had nothing left to give? Think carefully, because the answer might reveal more about your life than you ever imagined. There are moments in life when silence says more than words, when the absence of applause reveals who was truly listening, and when losing what we thought we needed leads us to what we actually deserved. For a long time, I believed that love meant staying, that loyalty required sacrifice, that motherhood meant putting yourself last, always. But faith has a mysterious way of guiding us through the darkest valleys, not so we remain in them, but so we can rise from them stronger, wiser, and finally free. When I left that house, I didn't carry bitterness in my suitcase. I carried clarity. I carried the knowledge that real love is not proven in celebration, but in the shadows, in the quiet seasons of life, when no one is watching, when there's no inheritance to be claimed, no room to be conquered, no performance to be applauded. That's where love reveals itself. And what I found in that valley was not loneliness, but light. Because when the world turns its back, heaven leans in. I could have stayed. I could have continued shrinking, pretending, surviving on scraps of attention, clinging to the hope that someone might remember who I used to be. But I chose a different path. I chose to believe that my story was not finished just because others had stopped reading it. I chose to believe that I was still worth something, not because I had anything left to give, but simply because I was still here. And if God gave me breath, then He still had a purpose for me. We are not defined by the way people treat us when we are useful. We are defined by how we choose to respond when they stop. When the respect fades, when the doors close, when even your own blood forgets how to say your name with tenderness, what do you do then? Do you break, or do you rise? I rose, not with anger, but with faith, because I knew that love is not always returned by the ones we give it to. Sometimes, it comes back to us in unexpected ways, through a child's eyes, through a stranger's kindness, through the quiet resilience that grows in solitude. I don't know what season you are in right now. Maybe you are the one giving everything and receiving nothing. Maybe you are waiting for someone to notice your pain. Or maybe, like I once was, you are pretending to be fine because you're afraid no one will catch you if you fall. But let me tell you this, you are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You are not weak because you feel tired. You are not unworthy because others couldn't see your light. You are loved, maybe not by those you expected, but by the one who created you for more than just survival. And in time, the people who truly matter will see you. One by one, they will come. Not because you chased them, not because you begged for love, but because light always draws those who are searching for warmth. And when they come, let them see the whole you, not the broken version you tried to hide, but the healed soul who walked through fire and came out whole. That's the you who is ready to be loved in truth. You see, sometimes losing everything is what clears the space for something greater. Sometimes, walking away is not the end of your story, it's the beginning of the chapter where you finally meet yourself. And that version of you, the one who chose peace over pleasing, dignity over dependence, truth over tolerance, that is the most powerful version of all. So if this story touched something in your heart, I invite you to pause for a moment. Think about who you are when no one's watching. Think about the love you've given, the forgiveness you've offered, the silence you've endured. You have not done any of that in vain. One day, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, someone will look at you and see what others missed. And when they do, you'll remember this moment. The one where you decided to keep going, even when the applause stopped. If you felt seen by this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your presence here makes these stories possible and keeps them alive for others who still need to hear them. And in the next video, you'll meet a woman who thought her son was caring for her out of love, until she discovered a hidden camera that revealed everything he never said to her face. You won't believe what she did next. See you there.